Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and this is the part 10 of the Platform Beginner series. In this episode, we're going to be implementing the functionality for the main and pause menu that we created on the previous video. Alright, let's get started. First, let's hide the world and let's bring up the main menu. Before we start adding scripts to the main menu, let's rename so it's easy to understand what each component does. I rename the first one to main menu panel. The first VBox container, I will rename it to main menu container. This one has title panel. And this one has a title label. This one will be selection panel. The container will be selection container. And now for the labels, I will do continue label. New game label. And now everything makes much more sense. Let's go into the scripts folder now and create a folder. And let's name it UI. This is where we're going to be putting all the UI scripts that we create on this video. Let's go ahead now and create a script here. And let's call this script selection menu. We're going to use this name and not main menu because we want to reuse this in the pause menu as well. Let's change the extents here. This extends from canvas layer, and let's attach it to the main menu. The first thing that we need here is a reference to the selection container because we want to manipulate all of these children. And from here, we can have different structures and not necessarily going to down main menu, because if we do it like this, you can see that we are binding this script to this structure. And for example, in the pause menu, this is not quite what we're going to have. It will be the selection menu, but it will not be under a main menu panel. So let's export the variable here. And let's say that is the type selection container and it must be a node. And now if you go here to the main menu, we can select the container right here. And you can just say that this is the one that we want. And let's create another variable here. Let's call it selection items. And let's create a ready function that what it's going to do is to get the selection container and put all its children into the selection items variable. And we can just assign the values like this. Selection items is equals to selection container, get children. And now selection items is an array because we assign the children right here. And this returns an array. Now, what we need to know is which item is currently selected. And for this, let's create another variable here. And let's call this one selection index. And this one is a bit more complicated, but it's nothing new. We just need to do a custom get and setter because every time that we set this value as a selection index, we want to update the selection items to highlight the current selection. So for the get of this property, we're going to return selection index. And for the set, we're going to do selection index equals to clamp I. We need to clamp the value. You can see that it says the clamps the value return an integer, not less than min and no more than max. And this is what we need here because we don't want to select an index that doesn't exist in the selection items. So now we can just say value, the mean value that we want is 0, and the maximum value is selection items dot size minus 1. Remember that size returns how many elements we have here. So if we have 2, we have 2, but we don't want the index to be 2. It must be 1 because the first element is always 0. And now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be iterating over the selection items. And whenever the index of the selection items match the selection index, we're going to be setting its modulate alpha to 1. And when it does not match, we're going to set the modulate alpha as 0.3 or 0.2. And this will allow us to highlight the elements. So to do this, let's do a for. And we're going to do this by selection items dot size. And what this will do is that we'll be starting at 0, and then we're going to be going until selection size. And then we can say selection items I dot modulate dot a is equals 1.0 if I is equals to selection index. Else we're going to set it to 0.3. And this modulate a right here is actually, if you go here to the label, let's go back to the scene. And you go to canvas item, visibility modulate. You can see that we can use this and change this alpha. That's what we are doing there. And this property is called modulate in this label. And then right here on the ready, after we initialize the selection items, we want to set the selection index to be equal 0. So we are on the first position. And now if we hit play, we should have the continue, that is the first item of the menu, selected. But however, if we try to press any key, it does not work. And that's because we didn't actually set anything up. Let's fix this. To capture input here, we're going to use the input function that receives an event. You can go to the documentation and read what it does. And the options that you have to not using this, but we're going to use this because this is just a simple menu. And the first thing here, we want to check which button we are pressing, and then we're gonna basically just changing the selection index, and it will automatically update the UI for us. And we're going to be using, if you go to the project settings on the input map and you check show built-in actions, we're going to be using this UI left, UI right, up, down, and all of this UI that is already built into Godot. For this one, what you can do is if event.isActionPressed, and then we say UI down, for example. Then we want to say selection index plus equals 1. And then we can do an else if right here, that event is action pressed. And then you can say UI up. And we do selection index minus equals 1. And by hitting play now, we should be able to select items in the menu. Now we need the ability to actually choose a selection, right? And we're going to code this first here in the input, and then we're going to code each one of these options one by one. We want to do another else if here, and the same thing. You said event is action pressed, and we're going to use UI accept. This is the enter key on the keyboard. And now we're going to create a variable here, and let's call this selection. And then we're going to selection items. And we're going to get the selection index. And we're going to check here if the selection has a method called select. And if it does, we want to say selection select, and we're going to use has method here and not the is as we do with the finite state machine. If you go here on the finite state machine, you can see that we have this check here if child is a state. And the reason we are not doing this because I don't want to force all the selection to be a label, because remember, if you go to the state here, the state must be a node, and the state cannot be anything else but a node at this point. And we don't want to force all the selection items in our menu to be just labels. It can be something different. It's just a matter of flexibility. I don't like to over engineering stuff, and I think that having this has method select is just perfect. It doesn't add complexity to the code, and it does not force us to have a label for the selection item. If we don't have this check right here, then we are blindly call selection.select. Every time that we have something here that doesn't have a script attached to it, or it has a script that does not have the select function, it will crash the application. Let's go ahead now and implement the X label, because this one is the easiest one. Let's create here on the UI, let's create a script, and let's call it exit selection. Let's create it. Let's attach the script to the X label. Let's extend from label, and let's create a function called select. And to implement this function is just get3.quit, and this should close the game for us. Now if we hit play and we select exit and press enter, the game closes. Just perfect. We're not going to be implementing the continue label and the options label because we still have a lot of things to do before we can actually save the state of the game. And for the options, I think this can be done later because this will be mostly related to the autosave and the sound volume for the game. And I don't feel that we need this right now. I just want to progress into the gameplay stuff. Now let's implement the new game label. In order to implement the new game label, we need access to the world so we can actually load the level. Right now, we don't need to load it. We're just going to set this as visible so you can see it. Let's create a script. And let's call this new game selection. Let's attach it to the new game label, and let's extend from label. Let's create a function select and just pass. You can see that now that we need the reference to the world, what you can do is this. And this will tie this script to be in this exact structure right here, right? It will assume that the world is here, right? It's 1 level, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, if we change the world structure, this will not work anymore, and we need to come here and change it. And this is not good. Luckily for us, Godot offers something that's called AutoLoad. And if you work with different engine, or maybe if you have experience programming, you will know this as Singletons. If you go to the project settings and you go to the AutoLoad, we can add scripts here that whenever we start the game, it will automatically instantiate these nodes that we add here to the scene, and then it will create a global reference to that node so we can access it from anywhere in the code. Singletons are a very powerful tool, but you cannot abuse them because, as I explained, they run whenever the application starts, and it starts adding nodes here. So you can actually slow down the application startup time, or you can end up linking some nodes to each other. And then whenever this node ceases to exist in the scene, you can have errors. And with the Singletons, it's not very clear where the error is. So just use it with care. To use this, we're going to be creating a script. It will be a singleton, and let's call this one game. And let's let it extend node. We don't need the class name here. All that we actually need here right now is a reference to the main, and you're gonna see why in just a minute. If you go to project settings, AutoLoad, and now we can choose a script, and we can choose game right here. It says node name game, we can change the name, but game is just okay. And we can add it. And we can enable or disable the global variable name. That's what I said, that we can access this anywhere in the code base. We're gonna leave it enabled. Now, when we hit play, if you go to the remote right here, you can see that we have a game node that is added. We didn't have this before, and now it has a member here for the main. However, it's no. Let's go to the main and let's create a main script for this. Let's attach it, make it extend nodes to D because the main is a node to D. And let's go into the ready function right here and just say game.main equals self. If we run the game again and we go to the remote, you can see that the game has a reference to the main. And this allows us to access anything into the main. The reason why we have this structure right here is because the main will hold a reference to all of its children. For example, we can add on ready var here to the main menu. And we can just do it like this. And we can have on ready var to the pause menu like this. And you can also have on ready var the world right here. And if you go now to the new game, what you can do here is game.main.mainMenu.hide. Let's remove the pass. And if you hit play now and we select the new game, we are hiding the main menu. And then we can also do game.main.world.visible equals 0. And then when we hit the new game, we now have access to the world and we can actually start doing stuff. However, this is not the way that we're going to be doing this. We're not going to just hide the world and show the world. We're going to load it and unload it as we go. Because right now, if you pay attention, if we load like this and we press D to move forward, you can see that we have the sound effects of the game. And this is because if you go to the new game now, we can see that the character is not on the starting position. And this is because everything was just hidden under the world and was actually running the game. Let's go ahead now and change a bit the structure of the world so we don't have this issue. The first thing that we want to do here is to add a node here, a node to D. And let's call this one as a level 1. And then we're gonna drag and drop everything into this level 1 and put it inside the world like this. And then let's go to the scenes and create a folder. And let's call it levels. Let's drag and drop level 1 into levels. Save it. And now we can remove it from the scene. And we can have the world as visible right here. It doesn't really matter. And let's attach a script to the world as well. Let's make it extend the node to D. Now what we need to do here is we need a reference to the current level that we have loaded. And we also need a reference to which levels we have. We can do this in a multitude of ways, but let's just keep it very simple for this tutorial. So I'm going to create here a levels map. And the key for the map will be level 1. And then we're going to drag and drop this, and the value will be the scene that we saved. And now we can load level name. Now then we can say current level is equal to load, and then we could say levels map level name dot instantiate, and then we can add as a child current level. And let's just add an unload function. All it's going to do is get the current level dot fill free and set current level to null. Now we can go back to the new game, and instead of doing this, we can just say load level, and we can say level 1. By hitting play now, you can see that when we press the keys, we no longer has the sounds, and when we press new game, we load the game. However, you can see right now that if we press enter one more time, we're gonna create a new character. And if you go to the remote right here, you can see that the world has 2 levels. And if we move them forward and press enter again, we're gonna have it again. And what is happening here is that the main menu is still active in the background. It's still listening to the inputs. And to fix this, we need to disable the input process when the menu is not visible. So let's create 2 functions here. One will be enable. And all this is going to do is going to set process input as true. And we're going to create another one called disable. And we're going to set process input as false. What set process input does, it enables and disables the input handling for this node. And then right here on the new game, what we want to do after we hide the menu, we're going to say game.main menu disable. And now we're going to disable the main menu. We can hit new game, we can go ahead, and now if we press enter, nothing changes. We're not creating more levels because the main menu is disabled. We could also go here and just add a check on the select function, say, oh, if the game main menu is visible, then okay, we're going to do something. But I find this better because we're going to disable it, and then we will have different menus. Sometimes the main menu can be visible, and then we have like another menu on top of it. Let's say the options menu. Right? We don't want to hide the main menu. We want to open an options menu on top of it, and then like we can get some corner cases where the menu is visible, but we should not interact with it. So just disabling it is just about right. And for the selection, this is all that we really need for this to happen. There's not much we can add here. Maybe here on the ready function. And what we can do here is disable every time that we start this. We're gonna add this script to the pause menu, and for the pause menu, it's not really enabled by default. We're gonna disable this, and then here on the main, we can say main menu dot enable. Everything should work as it was before, and that's it. We're not going to be touching this script anymore. This is all we have for this, and this is the same thing we're going to use for the pause menu later. Let's address something that is really simple to do, and it is transition. Because right now, when we select new game, we just hide the menu and load the game. And we don't have like a transition, like a fade in, fade out, or maybe a slide in and slide out animation. And to fix this, it's super simple. We're going to be using a canvas layer to create a transition. Let's go ahead and add a canvas layer. I will rename this to transition. And we actually want this to sit at the bottom of the tree right here, because when we do the transition, we want this to be rendered on top of everything else. Let's add here a color rectangle, Let's expand it to occupy the whole screen. Let's get the color here and set it to black, like this. Let's add a animation player. And we're going to use this animation player to animate the alpha value right here. So we have this transition like this. We can also use this like to be a slide in and slide out effect. But I think that fade in, fade out is simple and is very efficient. To use the animation player, we actually need to create animations here. And they work very similarly to the animated sprite. However, the animation player is much more powerful. It has some different events like animation change it and create animation change it. It has some like animation finished. It has all of these extra things that the animated sprite doesn't. And it also allows us to call methods inside of any node that it can animate. Let's create an animation by selecting the animation tab right down here and then on animation new. And let's create one animation called fade in. And let's set the time right here for the animation to be 0.5. And the way that we can animate values on different nodes is doing this. We can go to the node that we want to animate. And now we have this key right here. When we press the key here, we're going to add a keyframe property to be animated here in the animation player. So if you go ahead now and click this, it will prompt you this. You can just hit create. And now you can see that we have the color here. And if you go now here to the end of the animation, like 0.5, that we set as the end, and we go to the color rectangle right here, and we expand the color. And we bring the alpha all the way down, like this. And we press the key again, you're gonna animate the value. If you hit play, you can see that it does this fading transition. You can customize how this goes by using this animation track key edit. You can create a custom curve here, like this, to the animation. So like it starts aggressive and ends really slowly, or it starts really slow and ends really aggressive. That's really up to you. I will just leave it as default. Another thing that we want to make sure that is right here is the visibility of the canvas. And right now we can go to the canvas layer here and we have visible, and you can enable and disable it. So every time that we want to fade in, we want to make sure that we start as visible, and when we end it, we want to turn this visible to off. Now, we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna go back here to the start, and we're gonna keyframe this property, and then we're gonna go to the end of the animation, and we're gonna keyframe it again, but this time not selected. And now you can see that the transition is visible, but when we finish the animation, it is not visible anymore. Cool. Now you want to do this the inverted way. You want to do this for the fade out. Let's go ahead and create a fade out animation and do the same thing. The fade out animation starts in reverse. We start with the alpha as this. Let's set the animation time to be 0.5. And whenever we're fading out, we want to make sure that transition is always visible. Let's do it here. Let's go back to the color and set the alpha to the max value and keyframe this. And when we play, we have this. You can see that if we have the transition not visible, whenever we hit play, because we set this to be true at the very beginning of the animation, it will enable the visibility of the transition for us. And then when we fade in, we're gonna do the reverse. Nice. Now we have the transition ready. We just need a script here to actually trigger the animation and tell the node that called the function that the animation is done. whenever the animation is actually done. Let's go ahead now and add a script to this. Let's collapse all of this. We're here in the UI. I'm going to create a script and I'll call this one transition. Let's attach it. Change it to extends canvas layer. Let's grab a reference to the animation player. It's the animation, and it's just the animation player right here. And we're gonna need to tell whoever called us that the animation has finished, because we don't want to expose the animation player to whoever is calling the transition layer to do the transition. So let's create two signals here. One that will say faded in, and another one that's faded out. Let's create a function fade out, and this is just simple. We're gonna say animation.play, and we're gonna play the fade out animation. And for the fade in, we just gonna fade in. Now from here, from the animation player, let's connect the signal animation finished, the transition, and right here we have the animation name. Now we can do a match. Let's say animation name, and if the animation is fade in, we're gonna say faded in dot emit, so we emit a signal. Otherwise, if the animation is fade out, we're gonna say faded out dot emit. And we can test this going to the main menu right here. Let's add a reference to the transition. And before we enable the main menu, let's say transition.fade in. And then we're gonna enable the main menu. And also let's just set it as visible right here with the show. So we can start it with it disabled. We don't need to have it enabled all the time in the inspector. Let's move the enable function down here. And before we enable, we want to wait for the transition to finish fade in the screen. So we can say await transition dot faded in. And then we're gonna enable the main menu. And if we hit play, you can see that we transition. And if we try to change selection before the transition finishes, it doesn't allow us. If you go now to the new game option that we created, before we hide the main menu, go to game.main.transition.fade out. And then we're gonna fade out. We don't want to hide the main menu right away. We want to wait for the fade out to finish so we can hide the main menu and then load the level. But we want still to disable the input. Wait for the game.main.transition.faded out, and we want to say game.main.transition.fade in after we hide the menu and load the game. And of course, we want to wait for the fade in to finish. Let's say game.main.transition.faded in. And that's it for now. We can hit play, and we select new game. It will do the smooth transition to the new game. However, as we are transitioning, we're not waiting for the transition to finish to actually start the game. And there is another problem here, is that as soon as we finish fading out, before we even start fading in, we are going to enable the player to actually do inputs for the game. And this is an issue right now. So we need to pause the game as a whole. And we can do this by going to get3.paused and setting as true. You can check this property right here, and we'll say that it will pause the scene when we set this as true. Set the 2D and 3D physics will be stopped, and node process, physics process, and input will not be called anymore in the nodes of the scene. There is an exception to this, and we're gonna take a look at that in just a moment. But if we do this, we're gonna pause the game, and right here we can wait for the game.main.transition, fade it in, and then we can do get3 paused equals false. And then when we do new game here, but then we're gonna never finish the transition. And this is because, as we saw here, the process and physics processing inputs in the nodes will not be called anymore. Which means that right here in the transition, the animation player will not finish playing the animation. And this is definitely not something that we want. We want the transition to play even when the game is paused, because we can pause the game to do transitions. And we can do this if you go to the inspector and you go to node, under process, we have mode, and we have inherit right now, which means that it will inherit this from its parent. And right here, we have all of these options. You can see that process mode pausable is the default one, and the pausable is it will stop processing when the scene tree is paused. We can also have the process mode pausable, which means that whenever it is paused, it will process, and we can have it always or disabled. We want this to be always, because we always want to play the transitions whenever the game is paused or running. And if we hit play now, and we go to main menu, new game, we play the transition correctly. And this will be true to other elements of the game. For example, the pause menu. We want this to be always, because whenever we enable this pause menu, it's going to be one of those instances where the game is paused, but we want the pause menu to process input, and the same goes to the main menu right here. We have the main menu, and we have the input method, and whenever we pause the game, we don't have this callback anymore, so we cannot change the input. So let's set the main menu to be always, so we can have the game paused, and regardless of the fact if the game is paused or not, we're gonna be able to do things with the main menu. All right, now that we have the transition ready, we are loading the world for the player and all of this, and we already have the main menu, new game, and X label functioning as expected. We need to do the pause menu. In the pause menu, it is just as the main menu. We have access to the main menu, we have access to the world, we have access to everything that we need. So I will not stop too much on this one. I will just rush through it so you can follow along. Let's rename the first panel container to pause panel, the pause menu panel. And the first VBox container right here, we can say pause menu container. This one will be the title panel. Just show it, and this is the title label. And this one will be the selection panel. Then we have the selection container. Then we have the continue label. We have the option label. And the main menu label. Now that we have all of these organized, we can go here and attach the selection menu script to the pause menu, and then we can select the selection container right here, and it's this one. Click OK, and now when we have the selection, this pause menu up, we can see that we have something selected. We cannot, however, select anything. Let's just hide it for now. And now we need a way to actually bring up this menu whenever we are into the game. And we can do this on different places. We could, for example, extend this script and add a function here to actually listen for the key press to pause the game. We can also put it into the game itself. We can implement right here a input call and do all of this. However, it's not what we want to do in the game. The game is more like to hold very important reference to the game. For example, we can hold a reference to the player or for the camera. So when we want, for example, to do a camera shake or a camera zoom, we can just call like game.player or game.camera and get the camera or the player that we're trying to access. And for the main, the whole reason for the main existence is to hold references for us so we can easily access them. So for this one, what we're going to do is going to create a script here and we call this one level. Oh, this will be attached to all levels in our game. If we go to the scenes now and look and open the level 1 scene right here on the level 1, we're going to attach the level script and we're going to change it to be at the type node2d. And let's create a function here called pause. And this is going to be get3.pause equals true. So we're going to pause the game. And whenever we pause the game, we want to go game.main.pause menu dot selection index equals 0. So every time that we pause the game, we change the selection index to be 0. And then we just want to say game.main.pause menu.show. So we show the menu. And then you're gonna enable the main menu to handle input. You can copy all of this and just create a resume function. And this is just the inverted one for this. We don't need to actually change this. All we want to do here is hide this one instead of showing it, and we want to disable input whenever we do this. And we need a input handler here so we can actually pause the game. Let's say if event.isActionPressed, and we're going to use UI cancel. This is the ESC key on the keyboard, and for this we're going to pause the game. Now by saving this and going back to the main, we can close that, go back to the main. If we hit play now and go to a new game and we press ESC, you can see that we pause the game and now we have access to the pause menu. But we don't have anything selected just yet. Let's do the easiest one first, that is the continue option. Or here for UI, we're gonna create a new script. And you're gonna say continue selection. It's maybe a good idea if you had like more UI stuff to put everything into its own folder. For example, create a main menu folder to hold all the main menu stuff, and one for the pause, and maybe the ones that are not so complex outside, like the transition. But this is a really small project, so we don't actually need this. For the continue selection, right here, it's simple. This one will extend this label into the pause menu, into the continue label. Let's attach the script. And all this is going to do, you're gonna implement a select function right here. You're gonna say game.main.world.current level, because we have a reference to the current level, and we can say resume. And if we go now, start a game, pause it, you can see that we are mid-air and paused. We can now select the continue option and the game continues. Okay, now let's go ahead and implement the main menu label. And this one might seem a bit more complex, but if you really break down the steps to achieve this, it's super simple. Let's create a script here. Let's say main menu selection. Let's attach it to the main menu. Let's make it extends label. And let's create the select function. Okay, we need to go step by step here. The first thing that we want to do here is to disable the pause menu. So the player cannot do anything else. We can say pause menu dot disable. The second thing I want to do here is to fade out the screen. I'm going to say game main transition dot fade out. And we're going to wait for the transition to finish. And after the transition is done, we're gonna hide the pause menu. We're gonna show the main menu. We're gonna set the selection index to be 0, so we are always on the first option. We're gonna unload the current level, calling game main world unload. And after we call the unload, that we actually call the Q3 of the level, we have a small issue, because when you call Q3, what it actually does, it waits for the next frame to actually unload the whole thing. So we need to wait a frame here. And to do this, we can call await get3 process frame. What this does is wait for the next process frame. And now we can get a 3 and let's unpause it. Because remember, we are in the pause menu, so the game is paused right now. But we can unpause it because we already unloaded the world. And then we wanna go to the transition and fade in. So we can show the main menu. And then we can wait for the transition to finish. And then we can go to the main menu and enable the main menu, so the player can actually choose something from it. We can see that we have a lot of duplicated things, like, okay, we're always accessing the game transition. For example, the game main transition, we access this 3 times. And the main menu, we access it also 3 times. And the world 1 time. We could actually go here, and before we start doing all of these, we can create variables to this, and let's say main menu. And we can just go like this. And instead of doing game.main menu, we can just go like main menu dot something. So we don't have to actually repeat this code a lot. I don't recommend, like, if you only have like 2 usages of the same structure, I don't really recommend doing the variable, because this will allocate memory and it's not really needed. But if you start having many calls to the same chain, I really recommend you doing this. So for the transition, we're going to be the same thing. You say transition is equals to this. And then all we can do is just do it like this. And we had an error here. So, and that should be all that we need for this. And if we hit play now and go new game, and get new game, and if you go to the main menu, it will hide and bring up the main menu for us. And if we exit the game. There are a few things here that are kind of an issue for us. And let me show you the first one. If you go to the new game and you actually climb here, and now if you go to the main menu, the parallax background will be just the clouds, and it's not resetted to the initial position. And if you go to the new game, it will reset this. And if you go to the main menu again, you can see that the parallax background changed. And we can easily fix this by setting the screw offset of the parallax background to 0. But we need access to the background from the main. So let's create here a onReady var, and let's call this one parallax, and just get the reference for the parallax background. And whenever we go from the pause menu to the main menu right here, after we feed the world, right here we can just add game.main.parallax, but scroll offset is equal to vector2.0. And by hitting play, going to the new game, climbing, if we go to the main menu, it resets the background. And that's really it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I see you guys in the next one. Bye!